or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. I am your host, Huma Mirza, and tonight we are talking about something that's really close to my heart, reading for pleasure, and what reading actually looks like in primary schools today. I'm joined by a fantastic guest, and together we are going to dig into the challenges teachers face and the changes that could make reading better for everyone. But before we dive in, I would like to give a quick shout out to our sponsors. This show has been brought to you by Hachette Learning. They are the people behind some brilliant professional development books and resources that really support great teaching. And if you're after something fresh to spark your thinking, have a look at hachetteLearning.com. And now our other fantastic partner, which is BET. And if you've never been, it's basically the week in education. And it's happening from 21st to 23rd January 2026 at the Excel in London. You can expect workshops you'll actually want to be in, inspiring speakers, and loads of CPD and the newest EdTech in one place. And yes, the tickets are free. So grab yours at the ukbetshow.com. And to all the teachers out there, I'd like to give them a quick heads up. The Teacher Talk Connect conference is back, and we are heading to Manchester on Saturday, 14th March for our annual CPD and networking day. It's always such a great atmosphere, lots of opportunities for great conversations with like-minded people. And yes, once again, the tickets are completely free. So grab yours as soon as possible. And right, with all that out of the way, let's get to the good stuff. So tonight, we have someone very special on our show. And many of you will know him from his brilliant work on reading for pleasure across the country. So Jon Biddle is one of UK's most respected voices in this area. His Padlets, school projects, training and writing have supported many teachers in developing stronger reading cultures and giving children meaningful reading experiences. Jon, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show tonight. How are you doing?
Hi, Huma. Yeah, thank you ever so much for inviting me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here as well.
Great. Have you had a good weekend so far?
Well, Ipswich won 3-0 against Coventry, so that's a positive. So yeah, so all going well at the moment. Yeah.
Fabulous. So, Jon, for anyone listening who might not know you, how would you describe what you do and what really sparks your passion for children's literature?
I guess primarily I am still a primary school teacher. I'm class-based 4 days a week, but I'm very fortunate that I've got a very supportive leadership team at my school where I can get out into other schools, where I can work alongside other schools. I'm able to attend conferences. and talk about reading for pleasure and building, reading cultures in schools. Which has been hugely important to me probably for about the last 15 years now. I've always been a reader, from when I was a very young child. I remember going on my bike, on a Saturday afternoon to the library and, getting books and coming home and reading them. So I've always been passionate about reading it. And it was something that when I started teaching, I guess, I understood that the children enjoyed listening to stories. I understood that they liked reading, but I didn't really know about the impact of it, or didn't really sort of consider it much more deeply than that. And then I guess about 15 years ago, I went on a 3-day training course with the National Literary Trust, which was all about re-engaging boys with reading. From there, I started to look much more deeply into the pedagogy, into the practice around building a classroom reading culture. I guess things have just got.
That's really inspiring to hear. It's clear that you've got like this, real passion and a real heart for getting kids into reading. So what sparked your commitment to reading for pleasure, and how has it shaped your role in education?
I think, to be honest, it almost has defined my role in education at the moment. I guess I'm now at the point where I can see the impact of pupils that I taught 10 or 15 years ago. I still run into them, or I still receive the occasional email from them when they've tracked me down, talking about, thank you for getting me into books. I remember you showed me what Anthony Horowitz's books and Michael Morpurgo, and because of that, I'm still reading. And I think it's that long-term impact, which is something different about reading for pleasure, because actually, with most things that we do in school, we need to see that data quickly. We need to see that data at the end of a half term or at the end of a unit of work. But actually, with developing genuine lifelong readers, I think it takes much longer, and I think it could be 10 or 15 years before we actually see the impacts of what we're doing at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. And could you share a project or an initiative that you've led with our listeners that you feel that has really made a difference in how children feel about reading?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I might go off in two directions. First of all, I think I'll talk about ones that I've done in school that have had a real impact, but then perhaps talk about ones more widely. We've introduced a lot of things at Moorlands over the last 10 years, a lot of which we've kept going because we have seen their impact. Possibly the most powerful is when we introduced reading buddies across the school, where we were looking at our year 5 and 6 pupils going into nursery, reception, Key Stage 1, and reading with them. And it started off simply, they would go down and they would read a picture book with them. But we've got to the point now where we're also working very hard to develop our children's empathy skills. So our year 5 and 6 reading buddies now go down. They know what kinds of questions they can ask about empathy. They know how to engage the younger pupils in conversations about empathy and emotions and feelings. And what's really lovely is it's almost come full circle now, because this current wave of year 5, 6 reading buddies were ones who were supported when they were in reception in year 1. And so now they're the people that are doing the supporting. So it's lovely to see that sort of transition through the school. I think that would be sort of perhaps the biggest school impact that we've had. It is so embedded in what we do at Moorlands now. And you can see the impact. And, as you walk around the school where the reading buddies are working together, it's really, really powerful. I guess on a wider level, perhaps the thing that has the biggest impact is that I write a regular column for Educate magazine about reading for pleasure, which goes out to the NEU members. And I think, that I know that gets read by a lot of people, and the feedback from that is generally quite positive. It's a short piece, but I try and introduce as many practical, sustainable strategies as possible, because we all know how time pressed teachers are. There's so many things we want to try. Right. There's so many things we want to introduce. So if I can break things down for people and make it just a little bit easier for them to try something new, but also to explain what the teaching theory, what the evidence is behind that as well, I think it makes it a lot easier for people to introduce things.
So from your work with schools and the teachers in your schools, What are some of the trends or concerns you're hearing most often from educators right now?
I think this is going to be a recurring theme over the night. I think a lot of it comes back to time and how packed the primary curriculum is. We all. I think the understanding of the purpose of reading has increased quite significantly over the last few years, but it's still something that isn't always prioritised. And actually, if we know that it is the impact that it can have, it's something that should be at the forefront of our timetable, perhaps not something that's a bolt-on, not something that's an add-on. And I get so many emails from teachers and support staff saying, I want to devote that 15 minutes a day to story time, or I want to give my children independent reading time every day, but I don't have that flexibility. I think school leadership teams are coming more on board with the impact of it, and I think it's definitely getting a higher priority than it was. So I think the first thing I would say is time, and the second thing is again money. So many schools who used to get authors and poets and illustrators coming into the school, I know they've been cut down quite significantly. But also not just that, it's about getting fresh and exciting reading material into the schools as well. You can't have the same books in the school library that you had there 10 or 15 years ago. Fashions change, tastes change, and it needs to be a constant investment, not we've bought a set of books for the library, those books are going to last us indefinitely. There needs to be a constant drip feeding of new text going into the school library and into the classroom libraries as well. So I think they would be the two biggest factors, and they have, to be fair, been the two biggest factors that I can think of over the last 10 years. Hopefully there will be change. We've got the National Year of Reading coming up next month, or starting next month, and fingers crossed that gradually, as more information is coming out about that, I think that could have not only an impact next year, but hopefully a sustained impact going into the future as well.
Can you tell us a bit more about what you and your school are doing for the National Year of Reading?
I can tell you a little bit, but it's very sketchy at the moment. I mean,
okay.
we looked at the National Literary Trust video, which was released a couple of weeks ago, which explained how they're planning to deliver it. So term one is very much classroom-based practice. So it's about people developing things in their own classroom, looking at reading identities of pupils, teachers sharing their own reading identities, all that kind of thing. Term two is then taking that into a whole school reading culture. So that will be in the summer term. So that's where you're building those inter-class relationships, I suppose, and developing those reading relationships on a wider level. And then the final term, so starting in September this year, will be taking it beyond the school gates. So that's where we're thinking about taking reading into the local community, and how do we engage the local community more with the school's kind of reading for pleasures drive. So that's the model we're trying to follow at Moorlands. I mean, so we've got lots of things in place already, but we're having a big relaunch of them. So we've got our pupil recommendation shelf, for example. We've already got that up and running in all the classrooms across the school. There's significant evidence that shows that books that are recommended to children by their friends and by their peers are more likely to be read than books that are recommended to them by adults. And as they get older, that influence of their peers increases. So we've tried to build a real culture of peer recommendation across the school. We've got all things happening like reading scrapbooks and things. But I think the key is keeping it simple and ensuring that, however pressed we are for time, that 2 or 3 key things are happening in the classroom every day, because they're the solid foundations on which a school reading for pleasure culture is built. Sorry, carry on.
How are you getting the parents involved in this?
We've worked really hard with our parents over the last few years. A lot of our parents came through the school themselves as pupils, and if I'm being really truthful, didn't have the most positive experience of education. So it's been quite a challenge to bring them on board. But we do lots of things that I would call non-threatening. So all the reading activities that we invite the parents into the school to do don't actually involve too much reading. There's lots of talking about books, there's lots of sharing books, there's lots of bonding over books. But what we don't do is come in and ever ask them to read. I mean, I remember 5 or 6 years ago, we did a parental feedback survey, and one of the things one of the parents said was that I don't want to come into school in front of my kid and look stupid. And it's like, no, of course we would never ever put you in that position. That is not something that we are trying to do. So we get them in to take part in as many sort of non-threatening, enjoyable activities as possible. But I think what we also do is reach out and make book access as easy as possible for a lot of our parents. Where we work is quite a remote village. It's about 4 miles from the nearest public library. The last set of figures released showed that it has one of the lowest percentage of users of the public library in the whole of Norfolk. So we know the challenges we're up against. So rather than have a strict lending policy, it's very much come in. If you want to borrow some books from the library, please do take them home, enjoy them, bring them back when you're ready to. We do open up the library as well after school 1 or 2 nights a week to get the parents in there as well. So it's very much a collaborative thing rather than us telling them what they should be doing. We try and lead the way by modeling what we're doing and bringing them on board with what we're trying to achieve.
That's great, because I have always found it really hard to engage parents, or even to encourage them to attend a reading workshop. And I think
increasingly it's getting harder.
Yes,
I think
it's become a lot harder.
I think it has, and I think when you look at the reasons for that, I think partly the purpose of education seems to have changed over the last few years. I do think there's been, and I'm sure this has come up before, a switch in parental attitude since COVID. I think it's not viewed in quite the same way, but also lifestyles are very different. A lot of our parents don't work regular hours, so when we're it's making things happen and work at a time that's convenient for them. But also what we've tried to do to counter that is do as many online events as we can now. So we do online reading events sometimes and engage the parents that way and invite the parents that way. It has different challenges, but it's another way for them to be part of their children's reading journey.
Yes, and I think because of these challenges, the onus then lies on the teachers in the school to provide the children with those reading opportunities. So it's so important to have that 15-minute timetabled in and expose them to different, books and authors.
Absolutely. And I think as much as we want the parents on board, I think we also have to accept there will always be some families who can't or don't engage and there's a whole load of reasons behind that. There are hundreds of reasons behind that, but actually then we need to be that reading role model that child has, that adult reading role model in the classroom, in the school, around the school, because they need to see from somebody that reading is important. And if we can support the parents with sharing that load, I suppose it makes things better for everybody.
Yes, and I have been looking at national data, and that shows that reading enjoyment is the lowest it's been in 20 years. And a lot of children who can read simply don't want to. Why do you think we're seeing this level of disengagement, even with so many different initiatives in place?
That's I wish we all knew the answer. It is. I don't think there's one single thing behind it. I do think, and I'm not going to lay the blame at the foot of technology because it's not all, but I do think the rise of smartphones over the last 10 years has had a significant impact. I mean, if I'm being really honest, I know I read less now than I used to 10 or 15 years ago, because sometimes it is easier to scroll through your social media feed or check something on your phone rather than actually there. But I don't think that's the whole reason. I think part of it is again, lifestyles have changed. Children are busier. A lot of them have other activities, a lot of other interests. But also parents are much busier as well. We have a lot of parents who are working 2 jobs, and unfortunately, much as we wish it was otherwise, we have to be realistic and accept that they're not always going to have time to sit and read with their children. We try and make it manageable. We suggest, if you can do 5 or 10 minutes a day, that is better than not doing anything. But there are lots of reasons behind it. I think technology is one of them. It's certainly not to do with the quality of books that are coming out, I don't think, because there's been this huge explosion in the popularity of graphic novels and manga over the last few years. When children are in school, they are reading as long as that time is prioritized for them. I think sometimes we have to accept, actually, the situation has changed. Are we ever going to go back to the figures where we were at 10 years ago, where I think 60% of children did read for pleasure at home? I mean, I hope we are, and we're going to keep battling for that. But ultimately, the only thing we can control is how much reading they do in the classroom. If we can make that an enjoyable, positive, pleasurable experience, they will be more inclined to then read through volitional reading of their own at home in the evenings, at the weekends. So it's all part of a much bigger picture, I think. Sorry, I went completely off track there, didn't I?
No, not at all. Tell me a little bit about, I know we're, stepping aside here, but what does a reading lesson look like in your school?
A reading lesson, I guess we have to be very clear about the lessons in English, for example, where we are looking at the structure of the text and the narrative structure, and we're working out the motivation of the protagonists and whatever else, and actually a reading for pleasure lesson, I suppose. Our reading lessons themselves, I think we teach reading quite well. We obviously have a big focus on fluency. We have a big focus on comprehension skills. Key stage 1 and years 3 and 4 have a big focus on decoding. So I think the actual teaching of reading is strong across the school. But I think what we then do is think, well, we're teaching them these skills. How do we then ensure that those skills are embedded? How do we ensure that they're choosing to do that? So, if we're having a reading for pleasure session in the class, which we try and do every day, even if it's only 10 or 15 minutes, first of all, we don't expect the children to sit in the rows that they normally sit in for lessons. We have cushions, we have bean bags, they can sit wherever they choose to do in the classroom. I will make, if they want to sit with a friend and share a book, that's absolutely fine. We are not expecting silence. If they've got a book of football trivia that they want to share with their friend and they want to lie next to them and read that, that's great. That is reading. Reading is a social experience, and I don't think it needs to be viewed as something solitary that children do by themselves. I will be modelling reading in the classroom as well, as much as possible, as will any support staff that are in the classroom. So we'll be sitting there with our books. It might be as well, I'll be modelling something. If I'm reading a book and I'm not enjoying it, I will make a big thing of that to the children, saying, oh, do you know what? I've read the first 3 or 4 chapters of this. It's not something I'm particularly into. I'm going to go and change it, so that they then get the idea that, changing a book is acceptable. They don't have to persevere with something right through to the end. And then, after we've had our 10 or 15 minutes of reading time each day, we will then have what's called book blether or book talk, where we then just share some of our responses to what we've read. Again, it's very different from the conversations we'd have in an English lesson. We might talk about a favorite character from a book, or what we think is going to happen next. We might make book recommendations to each other, and that's very organic. Professor Teresa Kremen calls it book blether, where you just don't know how the conversation is going to go. And I think that is an area where where teachers do lack confidence, and I think there's a real argument there for having some high quality CPD, and hopefully that will start to happen next year, around enabling that book talk in the classroom.
Would you recommend that a class has a class book that is read to them at the end of the day? A book chosen, it could be chosen by the class or by the class teacher, but the teacher should read aloud and model how to read it. Do you think that comes under the umbrella of reading for pleasure?
Absolutely, but I think it goes much further than that as well. I think it does. I think it allows that opportunity for a class to engage with a book as a community. I think they're the books, and I use this phrase, where you want the children to laugh, to cry, to gasp, to think. You're not there unpicking the vocabulary. You're not there unpicking the sentence structure or anything. You're there enjoying the book together as a class. I would say that I don't think the end of the day is the best time to do it, though. I think if it happens at the end of the day, it too often falls off the timetable. I think, you know, we prioritise ours either in the last 15 minutes before lunch or straight after lunch to ensure that it's happened, because, you know, we've all been in that position where, you know, a lesson runs on too long, doesn't it, or the clearing up takes longer than expected, and actually the reading is something that gets bumped, but actually the reading is the one thing that can't get bumped. You know, if the classroom is you know, functioning, then the reading has to happen every day. And I think what we do, you know, it's important to mix it up as well. I mean, we do read class novels the whole time. We're currently reading a fantastic book called The Light Jar by Lisa Thompson. But interspersed with that, we also share picture books together. We read poetry together as well. So reading aloud is a huge part of the classroom culture. And I think it's something that is very, very embedded across the school. I think every class has poem of the day. Every class shares picture books. Sometimes we'll go online and, you know, read newsround articles together, just to show that it's all reading. You know, reading on a screen is just as valid as sitting there with a novel. But no, reading aloud is absolutely a key part of building that reading culture. I think it's the one thing that couldn't drop off, to be fair.
I love the recommendations that you put up on your Padlet, and I'm a huge fan of picture books. And there was one that I really, really liked. I wonder if you've heard of it. It's called The Water Tower by Gary Crew.
I have. I was
just a brilliant book.
I love it. All of his books are amazing, actually. He's incredibly talented. Yeah, I mean, we were. I was reading another one of his a couple of weeks ago to my class. I can't remember which one it was. But no, I think that there is this argument that should children not have picture books read to them once they've left Key Stage 1, and I think no, that's completely wrong, because actually, you know, they can be incredibly complex. The language used in them can be, you know, extremely powerful. But also, it's how children navigate the world these days. You know, looking at the text and looking at the images together. You know, that's how they look at things on a website, for example. So actually, there is a place to read, you know, for picture books through Year 6, and I'd probably say into secondary school as well.
Yeah, I used that book with my Year 6s, and it was a part of our English lessons as well. And it got the boys motivated into reading the book and writing. So I got good writing out of them from that book. We had a great time. I was also looking at the EEF guidance, and it stresses vocabulary, book talk, and daily exposure to high quality text, which we've just been talking about. What do you think stops schools from embedding this consistently? Because I think sometimes teachers don't teach vocabulary explicitly. And you know, book talk doesn't always happen. So
no, it doesn't. No, you're right. I think we teach vocabulary now a lot more explicitly than we did 5 or 6 years ago. I think it is a key part of our English teaching. You know, pre-teaching words before we're reading a story, but also it's in the vocabulary and the words that we model when we are talking about books as well. You know, we need to be not afraid of using words like protagonist and antagonist with the children. You know, we need to talk about the motivation of different characters. We have to use those words, and as we use those words and we model those words. So I'm talking about book specific vocabulary there, I suppose. But actually, I think also, are the books that are being read challenging enough sometimes? I mean, there's an increasing body of evidence which shows that, you know, children who are read books to them a year or two above their own reading level, they will pick up the vocabulary more quickly, that it will improve their comprehension skills, you know. So
thank you for saying that.
We shouldn't just be reading books that are for the children in our year group. We should be aiming, you know, as long as the content is appropriate, we should be aiming slightly higher than that, I think. Interspersing again with books that we just read because they're good fun to read. You know, it's getting, for a lot of it, is getting that balance right, I think, and thinking, right, you know, what are the needs of my class? Where do they need support?
So, I've been reading lots of different articles, and research says that children without books at home are far likely to read daily. So, what can schools then do realistically to support families with limited access to books, particularly in, children in early years when they're not exposed to books, because that's where, learning starts. So, how can schools help such families?
Absolutely. I think nationally, I think it's something like 1 in 13 or 1 in 14 children who don't have access to books. But with excuse me, but with pupil premium children, I think that is even higher. I think it's 1 in 6 or 1 in 7. So it is something that we need to be aware of, and something that we need to address. A lot of it comes down to how accessible we make the books that we've got on offer in school. In our early years and in our reception key stage 1, we have boxes of books literally by the door that the parents can dip into and take home, because it's the worst feeling in the world, and I've thought about this a lot. The last day of the summer term, we know there are going to be children going home without anything to read for 6 weeks, and that is not something that we can have. So we basically have our library shelves stripped bare over the summer. To be fair, 99% of those books come back in September. If we end up losing a few, for me, that's a cost I think that's worth paying, or a price that's worth paying. But again, it's specific initiatives like making sure that each term, we try as much as possible to focus on target children and make sure that they go home with a reading book with a teddy bear in the bag, and sachet of hot chocolate, all of those things that go on, just to make sure that reading is happening at school as much as possible, happening at home as much as possible. And I think it's very much knowing the families and knowing individual families how they like to be supported, because some people are very happy to take boxes of books home, some people less so. We have every term we have a termly book swap, which we invite the parents to. We always make sure that we've got far more books there than children bring in, so everyone has the opportunity to take part in that, which I think is important. But also when we've there are boxes of books that we often have out on display at the end of the day, which are perhaps books that are not in the best condition but still readable, ones that perhaps don't have a place in the school library anymore. We have those out for parents just to dip into, and there's no stigma attached to it because we have everybody taking books from it. So I think we just want the flow of books from the school into the local community to be as natural and as smooth as possible.
Those are such brilliant ideas, and they're very practical and doable, and I just hope schools and teachers listening to you can, put it in practice in their schools. So thank you for sharing that, Jon. And I know you mentioned digital devices, and children today are growing up in a very, very digital world. How much do you think phones, tablets, and gaming affects reading stamina and motivation?
I think it has a significant effect. I think, if we think about gaming specifically, everything is so instant. The rewards are so instant, the wins are so instant, and that's not. I don't think we can say they're competing against each other, because reading offers very different benefits. The pleasure of reading a book comes. We know how a book is structured. It might be that it takes the first 2 or 3 chapters to build up to the plot actually starting to happen. And I think some children have got out of the habit of having that patience almost. They're expecting immediate gratification because that's what they're used to with with the games that they play. So it's again about reinforcing that in school, that reading does teach you things that gaming can't. Reading teaches you about empathy and about compassion, and it teaches you about the world outside, the environment you're living in, which games can do as well. And I think there's also power in linking the two. In my classroom, in our school library, we've got lots of books about Minecraft and Roblox and various other games. I'm not sure of the quality of them, but children love reading them, and the children love sharing those books together. So it's bridging that gap, I suppose, between the two worlds, the gaming world and the reading world, but also making it really clear that they do offer different things. And there are times in the day when they'll just want to sit and play games, and hopefully there are times in the day where they'll want to sit and read. That's what we need to keep, reminding them that there are choices.
I think reading teaches them something really important, and that is the ability to sit down and concentrate. And games don't do that. Excuse me.
It's okay.
No,
you are focusing in a very different way, aren't you? But immediately when you finish your gaming session, you move on to something else. Whereas with a book, you can be thinking about that book.
Excuse me.
That's all right. You could be thinking about that book long after you've finished reading it. A really good book will have an impact on you that goes far beyond the day when you finish reading its pages. It will last much longer than that. But I also think we need to be realistic and accept, actually, gaming is a huge part of children's lives, and we can't push back against it. The genie's out of the bottle almost. So we need to find ways to link it with reading. And if that means reading online or listening to audiobooks while they're gaming, that's something that we've suggested before to parents, which some of them do. There's ways to sort of overlap those things, even if they're so insistent on going home and playing games for 3 or 4 hours. Well, in between, take a 10-minute break and just find that 10 minutes to read. And I think schools are dripping that message through. I think it's something that gets harder as the pupils get older. I think as they become more independent, I think they have more freedom, understandably. But I think it's something that we need to kind of accept and work around as much as possible. Okay, if it's not happening because of technology, let's work even harder to make sure it is happening in the classroom.
Okay, let's talk about something that I know you're really interested in, and it's graphic novels.
Oh, yes, please, yes.
Because one form of reading that they haven't gone out of fashion, and this form of reading isn't in decline. But some critiques would say that it's not considered as proper reading. So what do you want teachers and parents to understand about graphic novels and their value?
I think, it is proper reading. I think I'm going to need to answer in a bit more depth than that, really. First of all, there was a study done, I think it was the National Literary Trust in 2023, which looked into comics and graphic novels, and actually twice as many children who read graphic novels enjoyed reading for pleasure as those children who didn't. I think the figures were something like 59% for those who did read graphic novels compared to like 32% for those who didn't read graphic novels. So firstly, it is something the children want to read. And actually, if you're talking about creating readers who choose to read, and what they're choosing to read is graphic novels, let's get on board with that. Secondly, again, when you look at the vocabulary, you look at the text in graphic novels, it is as challenging. There's obviously not as many words, but the actual words in there are as challenging as those that you would find for chapter books for children of that age. But also, again, it teaches the children how to navigate the world, in a multimodal way. That combination of text, that combination of illustrations, they understand that they work together, and that's how you understand the full meaning of the story. But I think the other benefits are significant as well. We have lots and lots of children who enjoy writing their own graphic novels. They work with their partners, they work with their friends at lunchtime and after school, actually writing graphic novels because they're inspired by the ones that they're reading, which is fantastic. There's also the representation issue in graphic novels. Well, actually, it's very easy to see characters of different ethnicities and backgrounds in a graphic novel. They are visually represented, and I think some of the most popular graphic novels are the ones where the children can actually see themselves, being one of the characters. Which goes into the whole thing of the importance of authentic representation in children's books. But I think, you know, the other thing is that a graphic novel can be read quickly. You know, in 2 weeks, you could probably have half a class read a specific graphic novel, and actually then the children have got that commonality. They've got something that bonds them. You know, we've got huge excitement when the 9th Amulet book was released last year. The first 8 had come out, and there'd been like a 2 or 3 year gap for book 9 to come out, and when it eventually arrived in the classroom, we got 2 copies. You know, the sense of who's going to read it first was incredible, and they actually worked out their own system where everyone wrote their name on a post-it note, put it into a cup, and I had to pick out who were going to be the first people to read it, because it was something that they were all excited about, something they were all engaged with. And actually, graphic novels is the one area of reading where children are the experts. You know, I read graphic novels, I read manga occasionally, but my knowledge is nothing compared to some of the children in my class. And actually, if that's the reading that they're into, then that's the reading that we should be celebrating, that we should be championing. And I think that message is getting through. I think, you know, increasingly people understand that graphic novels are now an important part of a child's reading diet, and a part that's, you know, becoming more important by the year, I think.
What would you say to a teacher who would say, well, graphic novels have got fewer words, fewer complex sentence structures, and less sustained descriptive writing? So if we use it as a text for writing, I think there may be teachers who don't know how to use graphic novels, you know, for their writing. What would you advise to what is your advice for such teachers?
My first bit of advice would be to go to my colleague Richard Ruddick, who is an absolute graphic novel guru. You know, we worked in this adjacent classrooms for about 4 or 5 years, and his knowledge of graphic novels and using them in the classroom is immense. But you don't have to use the whole graphic novel. There will be times when we've just used one page from a graphic novel or one panel from a graphic novel. I'm thinking back to one we did last year. The graphic novel was called I Survived the Titanic, and there was one illustration in particular which had a boy in a life jacket standing on the deck, wondering when it was his turn to get into the lifeboat. And actually, the writing that we did from that was more powerful than any other piece of writing that we'd done that year, because they were looking at that illustration, they were looking at that boy, they were empathizing with him. So I think we need to think about how we use them. I mean, I don't think I've ever sat and read a whole graphic novel with a class, because they're actually quite difficult to read aloud. I think we have to use them in different ways. But we can be quite creative. Quite often we will do something on the lines of whiting out the text of the dialogue in a piece of text, and the children write their own version of that dialogue, so they can be used from turning narrative to move the text forward. If we're thinking about the teacher assessment framework, we can certainly use them in that way. There are creative ways to use them in the classroom, and I think it's being brave and actually saying, okay, the children are going to enjoy doing this, they're going to engage with this, we're going to get some good quality work from this. The word count, the vocabulary might not be as high as reading a page from a traditional book, but actually, what are we aiming to get? If it's good writing, they can be just as powerful as any other type of text for me.
Okay, before I move on to our next question, I'd like to give a quick shout out once again to our sponsor. This show has been brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, and they are the people behind some brilliant professional development books and resources that really support great teaching. And if you would like to go to their website, hachetlearning.com, you will find some great books for your personal development. Back to you, Jon. So thinking about representation, how important is it to how important is diverse and authentic representation in the books children read, and how can schools get better at creating that inclusive, meaningful text? I know you talk a lot about it. I know there's a lot on Padlet about it. So can you tell our viewers a bit about the work you do?
Yes, I can. Can I also do? I don't like to. Can I just do a quick recommendation of this book, which deals with this issue so beautifully? It's called Beyond the Secret Garden, and it's by Darren Chetty, Karen Sands O'Connor. The whole book is about diversity and representation in the classroom, and it's really, really good. But for me, I mean, the first thing we did was we did a stock take of what we already had in the school, and I think when we first addressed this, we realised that actually we had some diverse books. We had, but we didn't have enough. Not when we look at the catchment of our children. I think it's really, really important to actually make sure that they are authentic. That every year the CLPE do their reflecting reality study, which shows that I think it was about 2 years ago that the representation of minority ethnic characters in books had kind of peaked, and unfortunately it's dropped off a little bit over the last couple of years. But the books are out there, and we kind of have a moral duty to make sure that they're in our classrooms. If I can just share one very quick story. We were doing our end of term book swap last half term, and there's a year 5 girl. She came over from Nigeria about 6 months before that, and there was all that was left. There was about probably 20-25 picture books that were left for the book swap, and she immediately went and she picked up 3 books, and each of those 3 books had a character on the front cover that looked like her, and she was so pleased with that because for the first time, I think she'd genuinely seen herself reflected in the text that was available for her to read. And she took those books home and she showed her mum. And ever since then, she has been a regular in our school library because she knows that there are books there available for her to read that she can relate to. And I think that's the same, for every child. It's not just about ethnicity or religion. It's, every child wants to see them represented in the books that they're reading. And I think we have that. We have to try and make that happen. Again, a lot of it comes down to making sure that the books are being published. So when those books are published, we need to make sure that we're buying them, that we're celebrating them, that we're shouting about them, and making as many other people aware as possible.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's lovely. And now with the National Year of Reading coming up, and I know we spoke about this briefly before, what would you like to see prioritized nationally?
I think, there's so many things. I think we need a big conversation around the role of school libraries and librarians, because actually, I do understand that not every primary school can afford a full-time librarian. I mean, that would be a luxury and it would be amazing, but it couldn't. But there's no reason why 2 or 3 schools couldn't share a librarian between them, and that librarian it would be tricky to manage. But I think that the role of a school librarian is something that's huge. I also think it needs to. The big key for me of how we measure its success is at the end of next year is independent reading time and daily read aloud time given priority in the school timetable. If it is, and we can say that's happening in every single school, then for me it's been really successful. I think what we need to do is make sure that its impact doesn't end in December when the National Year of Reading ends. We need to look at sustained change. We need to be really strategic about how we move forward. How are we going to ensure that schools do have a supply of books coming in regularly? How are we going to ensure that schools are able to interact with authors and with illustrators, because we know it has a big impact, but we need to make sure then that it does happen. But also, how are we going to get the message out that reading is valuable for its own sake? We don't just read to get through our Key Stage 2 SATs. We read because it matters, because it can change us. We read because it helps us learn about empathy. We read because it helps us learn about kindness, because of all these different things. And they're the reasons that we want to encourage reading, not as something to do when you've got 10 minutes here or there, or whatever it is, but something that people choose to do because they know that it can relax them, it can calm them down, it can be good for people's mental health, it can teach them more about, like I said, communities outside their own. We need to get the benefits of reading over as much as we possibly can.
And I think it's also so important for teachers to show their excitement about books and for teachers to become readers themselves.
Absolutely, I think it is, and I think if you are a new teacher, I think one of the things that it's really important to do is be brave enough to share not your entire reading identity, but some of your reading identity with the children.
Yeah.
Talk to them about the books you remember reading as a child. Talk to them about when you went to a bookshop recently, perhaps, and some of the books that you picked up. Talk to them about when and where and how you like to read. Are you someone who always likes to read lying outside in the garden, or are you someone who prefers to curl up on the sofa? Show them that reading is important to you, and if you do it with enthusiasm and if you do it with a genuine passion, they will pick up on that and they will want to emulate you. Like I said, we are, for a lot of our children, the key reading role model in their life, and we need to be a role model that is somebody that they can actually look up to and think, yeah, I want to read as well.
What kind of books did you read when you were a child? Would you mind sharing a few?
No, not at all. There's a few that spring to mind. I grew up in the 70s when the Ladybird books were very, very popular.
Yes.
A lot of Ladybird books. I
learned how to read using the Ladybird books.
Oh, did you? Yeah, I think I probably did. I don't know how I learned to read. I just knew one day I could, so I'm assuming it was quite similar. I think, like most people, I probably went through an Enid Blyton phase at some point where you read, the famous five, and you realise that pretty much every book is identical, and every summer their parents send them off to the place with the highest crime rate in the country while they go off skiing in Austria or wherever they go, and they have to,
Yes.
But I think the books that probably had the most impact on me as a reader were the fighting fantasy game books, which are the ones where you choose what you want to happen next. So I don't know, you're in a room, you can hear footsteps. Do you open the door or do you go and hide somewhere? And usually going to hide is generally the safer option. I remember, I think I read those books constantly for 6 or 7 years. And they're books that actually I still recommend to pupils now. They've kind of been updated, and they've been reprinted with, modern looking covers. So there's still books that are popular, I think. What about you, Huma?
Enid Blyton was one of my favorite. I loved all her Famous Five series. And also, it was, I can't remember the name, Bimbo and Topsy, Hello, Mr. Twiddle.
I vaguely remember them, yeah.
They were really lovely books. So, yes. We know that reading aloud to children is one of the strongest evidence-based practices we have. What is your message to leaders to protect that time in the school timetable? And I know I've done like a little roundabout, I've come back to that question, but I feel because of timetable pressures and lack of time, we don't have that opportunity where, some schools don't have that opportunity where teachers are reading aloud to the children.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think it's not so much a case of protecting it, but perhaps more a case of having it as an absolute priority, like we would with, our safeguarding culture in school, or like we would with assemblies in school. It is something that just happens. And I think, that message just needs to get across that at some point there will be 15 minutes, however long it will be, even if it starts with 10 minutes allocated for reading aloud. Here are the benefits. We need to actually share with people, what the impact of it is. Not just the academic benefits, but the whole, the social and emotional benefits as well. And just fight as hard as we can to make sure it is on the timetable of every school. Because there's very little else we do, I think, that does have that same impact. Not only with reading and vocabulary, but also with building that class identity. I'm sure we've all been in a position where you know, we've sat and we've read a book, and actually the class has almost taken a collective deep breath and calm down, and actually it's almost as a reset sometimes as well. So the benefits of it are so enormous. So yeah, for me, let's not protect it, but let's just prioritize it and make sure that it is there.
I also wanted to talk about reading fluency, and you know, it seems that there is it's a national challenge. And what misunderstandings do you think schools have about teaching reading fluency effectively?
I'm certainly not an expert on this, and I wouldn't pretend to be, but I think for me, the two things that perhaps people do get slightly wrong is that they associate reading fluency with reading speed, and I think it's much more than that. I think it's you know, it's about prosody, it's about accuracy, it's about all those different, you know, it's about that bridge to comprehension, isn't it? So I think it's not just reading quickly. I think it's much more than that, and I think the other thing is, well, there's two other things actually. Firstly, thinking that it's fixed. I mean, it does very much depend on the text that a child's reading. You know, I've got children, if they're reading a report about a football match, they're going to read it with a far higher level of fluency than something else, because they're going to know a lot of the vocabulary already. They're going to have, you know, they're going to be aware of the language structure that's used in the match report, those kinds of things. So it can vary according to the text they're reading. And I think the third thing is that actually thinking it just happens. It doesn't. It needs lots and lots of explicit modelling from teachers. It needs that choral reading. It needs that echo reading. It's something that's actually taught rather than something that just develops organically. And I think for me they would be the main misconceptions, I suppose. But I think when it's taught well, it's as important as, or even more important than sort of phonics decoding, isn't it? Because actually it's what makes children into genuine readers rather than children who can read, if that makes sense.
Yeah, talking about decoding, what about children who decode well but struggle with comprehension because of limited vocabulary and exposure to books at home? How can teachers support them effectively?
Again, a lot of that comes back to those conversations in the classroom, doesn't it? Where first of all, we are having those conversations that include that challenging vocabulary, that they're exposed to lots and lots of words every day. That's where, again, reading the class book, reading together, talking about a story in common helps their comprehension as well. You know, if they are decoding, they've clearly got the reading skills, so it's then the vocabulary which needs developing. And I think, you know, that is something that can be taught, again, explicitly. I think it's important that you know, we do find time for that. And actually, you know, quite often what we'll do is, before we read the next chapter of a class book together, one that we're studying in English, not one that we're just reading, you know, we will pick out 12, 15 keywords from that chapter and talk about them together. And then as we encounter them during the chapter, we'll talk about whether they're used in the same context as the one we learned. Because again, the meaning of words can change according to the context in which they're used. But it comes from those rich classroom conversations where we are using that vocabulary, where we're modelling that vocabulary, we're encouraging them to use it in their responses in the conversations that we're having.
Now, big question, Jon. If you could redesign reading time in primary schools with absolutely no constraints, no timetable issues, no staffing limits, what would your ideal model look like?
Okay, right. Well, if I could, I mean, if we're, I mean, you would want every child reading and decoding fluently by the end of Key Stage 1, wouldn't you? That's the thing.
Yeah.
And then you know, the fluency from there. But if we're talking about reading for pleasure, which we kind of are, aren't we? I would be making sure that there is at least probably 40 minutes a day timetabled, set aside for it, 15 minutes of independent reading time, 15 minutes of class story time, and then that daily 10 minutes of book talk. But I would also make sure that staff were trained up in all of those areas, because actually, you know, reading a story aloud takes a skill, knowing when to stop, when to pause, knowing when to ask a question. There is a skill with that, and it's about teachers having a knowledge of those books. So the next thing that I would want would be actually dedicated CPD time for teachers to talk about books together. We're very fortunate. We have a small number of staff meetings each year where we do use that time to talk about books and reading together, where all the staff can bring books that they've shared over the year or books that they've read over the year and recommend them to each other. I know not many schools are in that position because our CPD timetables are so packed, but actually we need to be aware of what the children are reading, and we can't read everything, much as we'd like to. We can't read everything, but we do need to know about the books that the children are reading and what they're getting from them. So that CPD, I think, where we first of all learn how to read a story aloud effectively. Secondly, what a good independent reading session looks like. It isn't just sitting there in rows. And thirdly, how do we lead those book talk conversations, I suppose, but also how do we lead them? But then as they develop, how do we go from being the leader of them to just one of the participants? Because actually the more experience the children get at book talk and talking about reading together, the more of a backseat role we can take, where we just become more of an equal participant in what's happening rather than the person who's guiding it and leading it. There's hundreds of other things as well. I would have, I would be thinking of, weekly library sessions. I'd be making sure that there were books going out into the playgrounds at break time and lunchtime, which we do, ensuring that our parents are invited in at every opportunity to read. There's so many things that we could do. And I do think, that this partly why next year is so important, actually, is an opportunity for schools to really look at their reading culture and think about, right, how are we going to move this forward? How are we going to develop it?
I think that vision is incredible, and I think that's exactly the kind of bold thinking we need to promote reading for pleasure in schools. Teachers are often told to build a reading culture, but they're not shown how. So what do you think are the non-negotiables every school needs to have in place? And I know you've mentioned CPD.
Yeah. I think I would go back to a lot of what I've said. First of all, we need that high quality stock of books and reading material in the school, but also new material coming into the school the whole time. Secondly, it needs to be whole school buy-in. It does not, you need, and I've been very lucky in my school where my head teacher has always been committed to this as well, which has almost made my job very easy because actually, I've had their backing. So you need whole school buy-in, teaching staff, support staff, but also every other member of staff in the school as well. When we had staff reading buddies a couple of years ago to try and get things moving again after COVID, we every member of staff in the school had a child reading buddy. So that was our site supervisor, that was our office staff. It was literally everybody. So I think getting that message across as well. But also it's about building a more equivalent relationship, I suppose, with parents and actually valuing their contributions as well, because they've all got their own reading experiences that they can draw on and that they can share with us as a school. And we've had parents coming in reading stories to children. We've had our mystery readers have often been parents. We've had parents organising their own bookshelf in the front of the school so the children can see their parents as readers as well. So it's about that shared ownership of it for me. And then I think the last two things, again, and I've said this probably about 5 times now, would be independent reading time and that read aloud time. I think they are so important. And if I've mentioned them too much, then I do apologise, but they are so crucial to it. Then, that's why I do.
I agree. They're absolutely crucial. And I think we need to have that firmly embedded in schools. So finally, Jon, for teachers who feel overwhelmed or unsure where to start with reading for pleasure, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I think it's to start very, very slowly. I mean, if I'm being reflective. You know, it took us 5 or 6 years to get our school reading culture to anywhere where we, you know, almost a whole cohort of children going through to get it to where we felt secure with it. I think it can happen more quickly than that. My one piece of advice would be to try and develop your own knowledge of children's books, because it might be, if you're relying on books that you read when you were a child 20, 30, 40, however many years ago, you know, children's literature has moved on enormously in that time. And don't try and read everything. If all teachers read one chapter book, one graphic novel, one picture book each half term, you know, within a couple of years, they've got quite a big bank of reading knowledge to fall back on. And I think, again, it's about show the children you are that reading role model. And it might be that you don't read much through volition, you know, out of choice, but actually we still need to get the message over to children that that is something that is worth doing, and why it is worth doing. So it would be just to raise people's awareness, I think, of what's out there for the children to read. And that doesn't, you know, we're not just talking about chapter books, we are talking about graphic novels and comics and magazines. You know, it's all valuable. And I think it's important for teachers to accept that, you know, children having choice over what they're reading is one of the single most powerful motivators that they have. You know, if we dictate everything that they're reading, and I know sometimes, you know, we do banned books to certain levels and things, but they can't be the only books that children are reading. Sometimes, yes, fine, we do need to ensure they're reading books that are appropriate for them, but actually we need to give them access to all the children's books that are out there, and you know, really celebrate what's out there at the moment, I think.
That is such a grounded and reassuring message, Jon. Thank you so much. And a lovely note to end on. Really appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you for that insightful discussion. And hopefully we will meet again and see each other soon.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really nice to. I'm not sure how articulate I was, but hopefully some of my main points got across, and hopefully it was useful. Thank you.
You were very articulate, and you shared some really important information with us. So thank you very much. I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you. You too. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused